straight seam samples. For this assignment, you will take each of your 2x7 pieces that you have sewn, place right sides together like I showed you in the previous video, and you will stitch the seams. And it is practice of stitching the seams exactly on the seam allowance that is indicated for each sample. So for this first seam, we put right sides together and you stitch a 1/4 of an inch seam. So you are lining up these cut edges, pinning it, and stitching 1/4 of an inch. Remember, you have to do that back stitching. Anytime you sew a seam, it has to have back stitching, which is the stitching in reverse at the beginning and the end of the sample. So you need to practice this. This is what this week is about, getting familiar with a sewing machine and stitching seams. Always remember to have that back stitching at the beginning and in the end that locks in the seam. So you're stitching at 1/4 of an inch, and then the next one you put right sides together and you're stitching a 1 centimeter seam allowance, which is the same as 3/8 of an inch. So back stitching on both ends, 1 centimeter. Now for this next sample, you're placing 2 pieces of your fabric with right sides together, and then you stitch a 1/2 inch seam and you take it over to the iron, and you're going to press that seam open before you attach it to the paper. And you can use staples to attach your samples. So those are the first 3. The next sample, you are putting right sides together and you're stitching a 5/8 of an inch seam. So seams always include that back stitching. The next sample is 1 inch. So you put right sides together, stitch a 1 inch seam. Now the next samples, we do not have an overlock machine, but I want to tell you what it is and tell you a little bit about it. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And you can see on my sample here that this edge looks different. It's finished with threads here. And that is overlocking. It keeps the edge, or serging, some of you may know it as serging, and that keeps the raw edges from raveling. So it's a way of finishing. You do not have access, most of you at least, to my knowledge. If you do, go ahead and add that in, but I've crossed it out on your assignment. But so what you're going to do for these next remaining samples is you will repeat. So this one is a 1/4 of an inch with just a raw edge. The next one is 1 centimeter. And again, no overlocking or serging unless you have it. The next sample is a 1/2 an inch, and they have you overlock each side and then stitch it. But for this assignment, we're just going to stitch a 1/2 an inch seam, press it open, and attach it. The next sample is stitching a 5/8 of an inch seam and then pressing it open and attaching it. The last seam sample that you'll do is you put right sides together of your 2 pieces of fabric, stitch a 1 inch seam, iron or press that seam open, and attach your sample. So today you are really getting familiar with your sewing machine, practicing the seam allowances, and to get points for this assignment, each of the samples need to be sewn at the correct seam allowance.